Welcome. I'm Jim Love. I'm the CIO of IT World Canada, ITWC, and we're happy to have you back here with us again today. This is the second MapleSEC satellite session of 2022. And these sessions are designed to carry on the conversation started in our flagship security event that's held every October during Cybersecurity Awareness month, in there. And last month's events for the satellite focused on the 3 R's of cybersecurity, and it was tremendously popular. More than 400 of you joined up and registered to see. More have gone to look at the on-demand sessions, review the videos, and read the stories by ITWC's crack writing team. Now today, we're focused on how to prepare your team. And it's your team that makes this all happen. Their skills, their attitude, the care they take and the ability they have to respond. Now, I'm not going to say it's not the tools, it's the team. You don't tackle cybersecurity with a catchy phrase. The reality is that great tools are necessary. But you can have all the best tools, and if you don't have the right team, yeah. So today, we want to widen our perspective. We sometimes have too narrow a view of who's on the cybersecurity team. The people who do the technical work, the monitoring, investigating, and responding, they're essential. But thinking that your cybersecurity team is only an IT team is a trap. And it leaves you vulnerable, and it undermines your ability to respond. Cybersecurity needs a wider team, from executives to the frontline support staff. Now, we know that prevention requires everybody to be cybersecurity aware. They need to know the right behaviors. They need to recognize cybersecurity threats, from phishing attempts to the anomalous credential breaches. And we know that almost every breach requires a mistake, a careless action from a person, and that person can be almost anybody. So likewise, if we see response only in terms of a team within IT, our response could be compromised. Cybersecurity response requires a team that involves a wider range of people than we might think. From the executive who must make the decisions that in some cases can affect the survival of the company, to the people who need to communicate with employees, with customers, with suppliers, with the media, to the people who need to keep the company running. You need a big team. And as always we say, the bad guys can get it wrong 100 times. They just keep coming back. Your team has one shot. They have to get it right. So how do you create this team of cyber champions? That's what we're going to discuss today. Now, there'll be presentations and panels, but there's also an opportunity for you to ask questions throughout. And you'll get more out of this if you participate, I promise. Now, if you haven't been to an ITWC virtual event before, well, shame on you. No, serious. But I want to make sure, if you haven't, that you know how to get the most out of today's event. Now, right now, I'm speaking to you from what we call the Jumbotron, the main viewing screen. And immediately to your right, to your right, I always get it mixed up, but you know what I'm talking about. You'll see and below on some devices, you'll see the chat box. It's in one of those two places in the chat box. And if you have a question that you'd like to see posed to the presenters or panelists, or a question you'd like to see tackled in an open discussion, just put it in the chat box. Now, why don't you test it now by sharing a few words on what you want to get out of today. Just go into the chat, type in what most interests you, or what are the questions that you're going to have in there. And we'll pick those up and we'll follow in there. So type that in, or just say hi. in there. I check these things through the day, and I've got some live feeds that I can see what's going on out there. So no matter what you're interested in, and I hope you've taken the time to put that in the chat, I also hope you'll find something to take away from these sessions and from lots of other things on the platform that you should check out. There are downloads. There's our award-winning podcast, Cybersecurity Today. Don't forget to follow it. And all kinds of things you can do, including, and I'd like you to think about this, nominating a colleague or a friend for the 2022 Top Women in Cybersecurity Honor Roll. This is going to be the third year that we've paid tribute to some amazing women. And I'm confident we've only scratched the surface. So just to recap, you can use the chat to ask questions, have conversations, or share comments with the group. But if you hear something you want to share with the audience beyond our attendees, why don't you go to your Twitter account and use the hashtag MapleSEC. That's hashtag MapleSEC. So, just before we kick into gear, I'm going to take one more minute and acknowledge our sponsors and partners in today's event. We could not do this without their support. The platinum sponsor for today's 100-minute conference is Darktrace. They're joined by our gold sponsors, VMware and ManageEngine. Our supporting sponsors, Okta and TELUS. Please, please, please check out their videos, the downloadable white papers, and the TELUS study on the platform. And I'm told, if you look down there underneath my feet, you're going to find a free gift from Okta just for clicking the button below. So I've got I've got it right here, and free gift in there. So check it out. I'm not going to tell you what's in it. A little bit of a surprise. Okay. Just one last thank you. This entire series is supported by some great associations. The CIO Association Canada, I'm a member. The CIO Strategy Council, I'm also a very proud member of that. And the McKinsey Institute, who does some great things in the space of security. That's it. We're going to get started. So we'll start today by welcoming back Dave Massen. He's the Director of Enterprise Security with Darktrace. Dave is going to offer some opening remarks and share his thoughts on how people are the greatest resource in the fight against cyber criminals. Dave, take it away.
Hi everyone, and welcome again to MapleSEC March 2022. For those who missed the February edition, my name's Dave Massen, and I'm the Director of Enterprise Security at Darktrace. Darktrace is a global leader in cybersecurity AI and delivers a world-class technology that protects over 6,500 customers worldwide from advanced threats, including ransomware and cloud and SaaS attacks. Our fundamentally different approach applies self-learning AI to enable machines to understand the business in order to autonomously defend it. Our headquarters are in Cambridge in the United Kingdom, and the company has over 1,700 employees and over 30 offices worldwide, including 3 here in Canada. What do? At Darktrace, I advise our clients on cybersecurity, and I also support our business development and public relations work throughout the Americas and Europe. Now, when I last spoke to you, I touched on how computing, the internet, data, and interconnectedness have become part of our daily lives and are what supported us during the pandemic. When I mentioned cyber threat also being part of daily life, I pointed out, amongst other issues, nation-state espionage and attacks on critical infrastructure. A month later, and we've seen exactly that at the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, when cyber attacked the functions of the Ukrainian government and the financial sector. If last year's wake-up call was the attack on Colonial Pipeline, perhaps this year's is already the warnings our own government has made to all of us, but especially those involved in critical infrastructure, about the necessity to be ready for Russian-linked cyber attacks. Since those warnings, and since our own imposition of crippling economic sanctions on Russia, we can expect to be firmly in the crosshairs of retaliatory action if and when Russia decides to do something. While we continue to deal with working from home, the increase in the cyber attack surface, the sheer diversity of business infrastructure, and while we are faced with an increasingly large and increasingly sophisticated cyber threat, we wonder how a war raging thousands of miles away might affect us. As I said last month, risk is made up of the threat we face combined with our vulnerability to that threat. As a nation, we are now confronting perhaps one source of cyber threat itself through sanctions, but we can still be working to reduce our vulnerability to the overall cyber threat and thereby reduce our risk. And with that in mind, later we're holding a panel discussion on incident response and the planning and teamwork that goes into that in order to boost cyber resilience. We look at issues such as creative thinking, getting a team together, working on a plan, and getting everyone involved, including leadership. After the panel, one of my Darktrace colleagues is going to give you a demonstration on using self-learning AI for cyber defense and autonomous response. So this is your chance to see our technology in action and see how AI supports and augments security teams when dealing with a threat that is pretty much no longer a human scale issue. Anyway, I hope you can join us for the panel. I know I'm looking forward to the discussion. So once again, welcome to MapleSEC March 2022.
And thanks, Dave. Now, just to shift into the panel discussion, we're going to build on some of the things that Dave talked about in the panel discussion. As we looked how to build a team, one of the things we started to have discussions about was a team to do what? And the idea emerged that you need for a team to have a purpose. Now, it sounds obvious. We need a team to protect us from cybersecurity threats. But as we started to talk about it and unpack it, there's a lot of things, some we might not even think about. And so we brought our team back, Dave Massen, Director of Enterprise Security with Darktrace, Brennan Schmidt, the author of Cyber City Safe, and with a new book coming out in a few weeks, and Cat Code, who's the founder of Binary Tattoo. And they're going to talk to us about planning and building a team. So Dave, take it away.
Thanks very much, Jim. It's great to see you again. Okay, it's a pleasure to be back also with Kat and Brennan. Hi, guys. Yes, folks, we've got the band back together again, and we've brought you back the panelists from last month's MapleSEC to continue the discussion. So I used to be in the military, believe it or not, and there's a saying in the military that no plan of action survives more than 5 seconds contact with the enemy. And I think you might have just seen that with Russia's invasion in Ukraine. Or if you prefer, Mike Tyson's always said, you know what, everybody's got a plan until somebody gets punched on the nose. So no matter how you say it, it always comes down to the fact that when we have a security incident, your teams need to get on it and start jumping into action immediately for whatever sort of situation that they might face. Which brings us to the question, so who is the team? What's the plan? How do you get a team and a plan together? How do you anticipate all the things that might actually happen in real life? So to begin the whole discussion, I've got a question, and it's going to be, if you've been at this at any length of time, you've probably encountered a real life situation where there was an incident and it required a response, and all kinds of things happened that you never actually imagined. Brennan, does that ring a bell with you?
It does, Dave. And I'm reminded of the 2018 Humboldt Broncos bus tragedy. Many will recall that was a event that was just tragic beyond all imagination. Just on so many different accounts. And while it wasn't a typical security incident, the bus accident that transpired because of the semi colliding with the hockey players was really a case of the worst case scenario playing out. And to bring that to mind, 3 things happened that we really didn't anticipate. And so I was a part of the crisis response team with that, focusing more so on communications. But the first thing that became apparent for us was, where are the account credentials? And after doing a bit of digging, we ended up doing a bit of exploration. We found out that the individual who was responsible for the accounts, unfortunately, perished in the accident. So that's why we had to do quite a lot of work with the legal team in order to actually track down how we can go about getting into the accounts. If that wasn't bad enough, over and above what was transpiring with the families and the emergency responders and just everyone, it was really an all hands effort. How do you actually get it set up so that there's some sort of central way of administering the information? So in our case, we didn't have access to the DNS, and so we couldn't redirect any sort of traffic. So we had to buy a domain name that folks could get access to. But unfortunately, those domain names were getting bought up by every single person you can imagine, which was very, very odd in our case, and we just couldn't figure it out. So those were 3 examples that came to mind here. But the last thing that I'll add here is in terms of things that you just wouldn't expect. So we ended up going to Humboldt as part of the response, and I made the mistake of placing the key fob on the top of the car. And I failed to mention to the driver that the key fob was sitting on the top of the vehicle. And so we ended up driving away with that key fob, and it fell off. Thankfully for us, we made it to Humboldt, but had the restaurant that we wanted to stop at midway through would have been open, we wouldn't have been able to start the car. So that's really what comes to mind here. So it's just on top of. That's what it was.
Actually, I was once in a situation where a colleague of mine put a brown paper bag with an awful lot of money and cash in it on the roof of a car, and the car drove off, and you would have thought they would have just blown off. No, it stuck to the roof of that car like glue. And I always remember seeing my colleague legging it down the road trying to catch up with the car, and he never did. Kat, that was an interesting tale there from Brennan. Thoughts?
Well, Brandon's the one who always likes to use the word imagination, so I'm going to run off of that one. But really, you have to expect the unexpected. And one of the ways I like to look at it from a fun side is old TV shows and movies are amazing for this, because technology has evolved so quickly that our media from a decade ago was envisioning these crazy ways you could hack into things that didn't exist at that time that now are the older technology. So we hear all these stories about the famous one with the casino where there was an IoT thermometer inside the aquarium, inside the casino, and that's how the hackers got in. I was watching Person of Interest, which is from 2012, 2013, and they hacked in using the one smart TV that was in the building at the time, or they hacked in using phones to triangulate someone with geotriangulation with geotagging. But I was watching it and I was thinking that's such a perfect example, because now we're protecting for the highest level of technology. But if you have something in your building that is even 5 years dated or 10 years dated, it's easily hackable. It doesn't fit in the system. It's harder to protect. So looking at things from that perspective, watch the old media we used to laugh at. Everyone laughed at the movie Hackers at the time. But go back to those movies and go, how could you leverage that kind of simplistic stuff today in order to create a problem in a company? And how can we mitigate those risks?
Security is a serious topic, but it's sometimes hard to get people to use their imagination. So how do we get the right people together and actually get them thinking outside the box? I'm going to come back to you with that one, Kat.
Yeah, great. I really like to gamify it, and I really like to put the onus back on the people to come up with the ideas. So you could say, hey, you know what, guys, we've hidden a password on someone's laptop. How would you figure out how to get it? And then send the ideas out to the company and have people come up with ideas on how to get it. Or we've hidden something in someone's file cabinet in their office. See if you can find a way into the office to get into that physical location, because they will come up with the ideas that you haven't thought of. And so that will really lend to the scenarios of, oh, I didn't realize that you could social engineer someone, or I didn't realize that person's email was sitting on Facebook where I could get it. But inviting people to participate has a bought interest into the whole system.
Brennan, what's your thoughts on this subject?
Well, I think those are fantastic examples that Kat shared here. And the thing that comes to mind in terms of kind of flipping that upside down here. So once you identify and you have those folks with respect to who you want as part of your team, then I think it's really turning that into something where, okay, let's say the user account that is used to administer our farm is compromised and we need to get access to it. What kind of recovery process do we have in place? Or back to the example before with Twitter. Twitter might have something where you have recovery keys where, let's say you forget the password or you don't have access to that account anymore. What kind of characters can you type in and verify that you are who you say you are to Twitter, so at least you can get your message out? Those are really two examples that come to mind here. But I think, Kat, it's very, very important, like she said, to make sure that you really have interest. And that's really what it comes down to is, make these things really, really fun and get people to lean in and think of it less as something that's really, really scary and more so as an activity that you can do to just really bolster your capabilities.
How about who is it we're going to get together on the team? I'm going to come back to you on that one, Kat.
Yeah, so there's a variety of people that you need. You need representation from IT, because all incidents are security incidents, but a lot of incidents are also privacy incidents. So you need to make sure that you have someone representing privacy. That may or may not be legal. Again, depends on the structure of your company. If you have insurance, which I'm hoping everyone does, so it should be contact your insurance. Some insurance companies will provide you with their own forensics, their own legal counsel, and some of them will provide you with money to hire them, and some will have them hire your own. So it's actually really, really important that you get those details. So you should have obviously your top end, your execs, again, IT for sure, privacy for sure. You're going to need someone from PR, because you are in the event that it gets escalated, you're going to need to share that information externally. And I would also include whoever is responsible for your customer service or customer team, because when people call in, they need to know what to say. And so having that person at the table in some capacity to be able to go back to the team and say, this is the script when people call in. But again, ensuring also the external people, do you have the phone number of whoever provides power to your building? Do you have your internet service provider? Like, depending on what could be down, if you have an IoT building, do you have, let's say you've got access that's controlled remotely, do you have their number in case nobody can get in the building? So really running through the whole gamut of the scenarios that we've talked about, how to come up with those, and then finding a representative for each of those areas.
Great points, guys. Great points, guys, and pointing out the sort of issues that really do come up when you start thinking about this subject for real. Okay, so we've exercised a lot of creativity, imagination. We've actually got a team together, so we've assembled the team. You've come up with some great ideas. Now, how do we get the team to actually develop an action plan? And I'm going to come back to you on this one, Brennan, first.
So that's a great point, Dave, and Kat pointed out a lot of really great pieces of information to pay attention to. So I think the only thing that I would add just to your question is really come up with a risk register. So that's to say something where you can identify what are those things that are of most importance to you. What is the risk? What is the impact? What is the likelihood? Whatever measures that your organization is keen on having as far as consistent measures, and then come up with that list. And if you do the math, you'll see right away that those things that you should focus on should bubble up to the top of the list. And building on that, it would be the identification of what kinds of key priorities you need to focus on, which are likely tied to your organization's crown jewels, or that's to say those things that would spell disaster if they're tampered with or removed. So I think if I was to give any sort of advice, because I can imagine that it would be very overwhelming to folks to say, hey, okay, we've got a lot of great ideas, but how do we actually go about identifying that? Great way would be to figure out, is multi-factor authentication something that you have to look at if it's disabled? Are service accounts something that you should pay attention to? And last but not least, something that gets overlooked, which I think Kat touched on, was API integrations. So is there anything in your supply chain that could potentially do some damage?
Kat, your thoughts?
So great points made by Brennan. Really looking at all of those assets that you have. And I also looked at 3 different kinds of assets that you're trying to protect. There's your digital assets, which is your data, of course, that everyone considers. There's your physical assets, like if someone came in and grabbed a laptop. So you have to consider that. But then there's also your human assets. And I know we were privileged last month to talk about the Great Resignation, but also protecting that. So if, Brennan had a tragic but a horrible example earlier of someone who was responsible for all the accounts that could no longer control the accounts. So when you're looking to develop that action plan, make sure you understand those 3 areas of the things that you're looking at protecting. In order to get started, I would advocate starting with a template. And there's tons of free examples online. A lot of the software companies have them. I know Microsoft has some templates for some incident response. CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, has one that you can download online for free. Atlassian has one. If you just Google incident response template, you will get a number of them. But the key, of course, is not just using it as is socializing it within your company and customizing it to make it work for those assets that you're protecting.
Great thoughts, great ideas. Okay, guys, so you've drafted the plan. and you've really talked through a number of situations that might happen, and you've added in the things that you think you need at this time. But how do you get buy-in? How do you get engagement? And I'm going to come right back to you, Kat, with that one.
Oh, yeah. So I have a pet peeve around policy. I spend a lot of time reading them. But what happens to a lot of companies is they buy a package of policies because you need to have everything covered. But nobody actually takes the time to go through them, customize them again, socialize them, and make sure everyone is on board with what they say. So to be clear, having a policy in your back pocket is all well and good, but it's not helpful unless you're actually following what it says. So to me, the big thing is making sure that any of these policies and procedures that you have, that you've actually taken the time to customize them and make them work for your company. There is a session coming on later in MapleSEC today on gamification. So stay tuned for that, because that'll really help in understanding testing your plan and different scenarios that you can look at.
Brennan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think everything, I'm just going check in my brain as far as checklists. So that's something that comes to mind here in terms of building on what Kat said. And the other thing too that I thought that I'd mention is also just really to get that buy-in is to identify what those core capabilities are in your organization. Because I think in a lot of cases, organizations tend to think that, well, this is a legal or a policy responsibility, like what Kat had mentioned. But unfortunately, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of dependencies that folks don't typically think about. So that's why I think even as a general placemat exercise, where once we have people coming back into the office, what better way than to actually identify and say across the enterprise, what are our core capabilities? What is it that we actually do? And then start identifying where cybersecurity has touch points. And I think you'll find out rather quickly that based off of what Kat said before, in terms of the people and the process and the technology, there's going to be a lot of overlap. So that's why I think that it's going to be important to shore up any gaps.
Yeah, very good points. Very good points. Okay, guys, I've got a bit of a trick question coming up now that I've come up with. And I'm going to go back in time. In another life, I used to do an awful lot of work with the police forces in Scotland. There used to be several, now there's only one. And in any crisis, any incident that ever happened, what the police always used to say to me was, establish who's in charge, work out who's in charge. I've seen it happen many times, and a central decision maker or coordinator, whatever you want to call them, always seems to come to the floor. So my question for you guys is, does the plan need a leader, and does it have to be any particular kind of leader? I'm going to toss a coin, and Brennan, you won. You go first.
Well, I think just back to that example of the Broncos, and while it was a very unfortunate and tragic circumstance, it was very telling in terms of how you have different folks representing different organizations and different business units really stepping up. So in the case of technology, it was a really classic example of how earlier, I think it was a month before the tragedy actually happened, the company that was helping out with the crisis communications ended up migrating to the cloud. And so everyone had an account. And so we were able to set up a resource mailbox, because at the beginning of the crisis, we had one individual that was tied to responding to media requests from across the globe. So by having technology come in and setting up and just going really back to those basics as far as resource mailboxes, getting collaboration in place, this is IT's opportunity to shine, but more importantly, just start really engaging across the business units to say, what kind of capabilities do we have that we can help you?
Kat, who's in charge? What do you think?
Oh, I'm always in charge. No, it depends. It depends on your company. If you have a company that is very authoritarian, like it's structured, like sometimes in the government, it has to be someone at a certain level that has to take accountability, and that's fine. But I found that the best person to be in charge is the person who's most organized, because what you really want inside an incident is communication flow. So you need someone who can track what's happening, ensure it's on track to do what it's supposed to do, communicate between the IT team, the execs, your PR, and ensure that communication is happening at the right cadence, be it half hour, every 4 hours. So somebody has to be responsible for that. It might be your head of IT. It might be a senior project manager. it has to be someone who's appointed ahead of time, and then you need backups for that individual. So if that person's away, someone else knows that they are the understudy and they are coming in for this role. But it definitely, somebody has to be in charge and somebody has to be running it. And so, Dave, what was your experience when you did this?
I've seen it happen many times, and having been tipped off by the police force to watch out for this, I saw it happen regularly. And I can remember an incident, it's quite a long time ago now, where there'd been a major terrorist incident. And it was in the early hours in the morning, and resources needed to be applied, and the normal leader just wasn't there. Now, I wasn't a police officer, I was a major stakeholder, but I was outside the police organization. And things just weren't happening. So I decided I would take charge, and I allocated their resources for them. And it had an immediate calming influence on everybody, just that somebody'd made a decision. Maybe I was right, maybe I was wrong, I don't know. But it had an immediate effect, and I always remembered that. Work out who's in charge, and if nobody is in charge, maybe you have to take charge yourself. But there you go. Kat, Brennan, that was some great top tips and advice, some great answers to those questions. Really, really, really appreciate that. We're coming at the end of the panel now, folks. A couple of house sorting tips. I just want to let you know that my colleague Noah Smith's coming up shortly with a presentation on Darktrace and our technology, so please hang around and watch that. But first of all, I'm going to hand you back to Jim Love. Jim, back to you.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, panel, and thank you, audience. I've been for those of you who can multitask, I've been following the chat and the panel at the same time, and there are lots of great comments in there. Keep them coming in there. Welcome. There's people talked. There's a lot of good discussion about the panel in there, and some of the ideas, some of the questions, and thank you to Kat and to Brennan who are in there answering those questions. So keep it up and keep them coming in there. Somebody told me they're a student and they're coming in to get some experience in network, and so please, to open up a chat with someone on the chat. That's a good idea, and get to know some of the people who are here. That's a great idea in there. That's about it. So thanks, Dave, again. Thanks, panel. And if you have questions, keep putting them in the chat. And if you have anything you want to share with the wider social media, put it in hashtag MapleSEC. That's hashtag MapleSEC in there. Okay. Now, if you get through this and I noticed somebody said that my sound dropped or something in there when Brennan was saying something, or if you want to share this with somebody else in there, or you just missed something, if there are points in the conversation you want to review or share with your teams, this is going to be available on an on-demand basis on maplesec.ca, along with all of our other previous MapleSEC events. So don't worry about it. We got your back on that one. Now, we're talking about teams today and getting them to be at their best. And everyone tells me all these good things: training, planning, team building. These are all essential. So why don't we do them? Well, I guess some of us just feel we don't have time. And and I have tremendous sympathy for that. You're up to your ears in the day-to-day. You're sifting through attack data, even though you can never keep up. And even if you get the budget for more staff, I'm sure people have been trying to hire out there, you can't find enough trained people. So how do you deal with this? That is the subject of our next presentation. Now, Darktrace expert Noah Smith is going to show us how AI can be used to automate and to deal with cyber attacks in real time and make time for your team to do what they should be doing: planning, training, testing, and ultimately responding. Noah's going to show us how this works. He's going to give us a little demo of a system running this, and after that he's going to appear live with me to answer questions. So while you're watching, let's get those questions for Noah. Type them into the chat. We're following you there. So Noah, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everybody. It's great to be on, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk to you guys a little bit more about Darktrace, and specifically Darktrace's autonomous response capability. So again, some of the issues that we obviously see across different organizations with IT teams and security teams is just really not having enough time to effectively manage and monitor the entirety of the network and the corporate infrastructure. So again, we see an attack potentially at 4 a.m. on a Sunday. It's really hard for the security team and the IT team to effectively react to that in a timely manner. What autonomous response allows for is 24/7 protection and response across the entirety of your digital estate, providing, again, timely and surgical responses because of Darktrace's understanding of normal behavior across the infrastructure. So what autonomous response can really be is a force multiplier for IT teams, putting a little bit more time back into their day as they can trust that this AI engine is able to take those proportionate responses on potential fast-moving attacks such as ransomware and 0 days for them in the background. So what I want to highlight here in this brief demo I have prepared is simply how our autonomous response is able to do that. We're going to be actually looking at a fast-moving ransomware attack that originated in the email environment here. So as you can see in front of me, we have our threat visualizer. And what we're looking at here is an Angela Darling's device. And you can see actually that it has been Antigena controlled, meaning the autonomous response has acted in some way on this device in some capacity. So what we'll do here is pull up the device event log for this user. And the device event log is actually able to provide a second-by-second, minute-by-minute playback of exactly what's going on the device at this given period of time. So right off the bat, we can see Angela Darling here connecting out to Payment Solutions, Inc. after she clicks that malicious payload link that's been containing that ransomware. And we can see that this domain has 100% domain rareness and anomalousness, given it's never come in contact with the environment before. So now what we can do is actually up here on the right, this little playback feature, play through these events on Angela's device in chronological order, giving us an idea of just how this attack unfolded and just how the autonomous response was able to step in and neutralize this ransomware payload. So I'll go ahead and click play here, and we can see as soon as Angela Darling connects out to Payment Solutions, Inc., we have a mass amount of connections attempting to be made from her device to other internal devices here. Again, very indicative of ransomware as it attempts to spread across the organization. We see some SMB read successes as it attempts to read and write files across the organization here. But as we see unusual activity actually hit around 87% here due to these anomalous connections attempted to be made from her device, we see Antigena actually step in here, the autonomous response, to enforce a pattern of life on her device for 3 hours. And essentially what we mean by that is that in this case, the autonomous response is able to enforce that normal behavior on Angela's device that she normally exhibits here, blocking all other kinds of anomalous actions or connections attempting to be made, ensuring that all these anomalous connections that we see from the ransomware payload are stopped immediately in its tracks. And I do want to highlight as well that the autonomous response is actually able to take this response and take action within around 6 or 7 seconds here after that initial release of the ransomware payload. So as you can see here, the really surgical nature of the response here in enforcing that normal behavior not only allows for a very timely response to potential threats and fast-moving attacks here, but is also able to enforce normal business operations across the organization, therefore not hindering day-to-day workflow of employees or just general business operations and processes in any way. And as you can see here, Antigena is able to do this, our autonomous response, on a 24/7 basis. Again, providing that real-time coverage and protection for you in the background, no matter what day or what hour of the day we're looking at. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope all of you found that interesting. That's all I have for the demo here. Jim, I'll pass it back over to you. Yeah, no, 100%. And that's, perfectly valid question too, in regards to kind of how we take that response. Essentially, we have multiple different ways that you can kind of build your confidence in the AI. But one way that you can really trust the AI to take that right decision is essentially Antigena, that autonomous response, is not going to be actioning every single alert that pops into the user interface, right? Instead, what we're going to be doing is looking at only the highest fidelity alerts that are popping in or surfacing in your environment, essentially in that front. What we're going to be doing is only actioning those very high fidelity alerts. And on top of that, taking a very precise and surgical action to, again, deter the threat at hand, but in that case, not actually affect negatively any kind of business continuity or operations occurring, right? Because that response is going to be very precise and surgical there. No, that's a great question, and again, I think it's a relevant concern, right, for the industry at this point in time. But essentially, the way that you can be a little bit more confident, I guess, in dark trace and the unsupervised machine learning is that it's going to be constantly evolving and understanding the changes that occur on the environment, right? We're not going to say deploy in your environment and establish a baseline and leave it at that. The AI is going to be continuously evolving and learning that normal behavior as it changes and the infrastructure begins to evolve, right? So that you can be fairly certain that we're going to have a very good grasp on the normal behavior and normal behavioral patterns across the infrastructure to be able to detect those potential threats as they surface and in real time. Great question. As of recent, we can be. But historically, no. So Antigena, the autonomous response there is actually deployed centrally through, say, a core immune system deployment, which can be either centralized physically or entirely virtually in the cloud. But essentially, we do not need to be deployed on the actual endpoint to take that response. However, if it suits the customer or the environment better, we definitely can be.
So the question, what platforms, is sort of irrelevant. You can be on any platform at all, right?
Exactly. I think a benefit of the approach is essentially how we're able to cover the entire digital estate if need be, right? Depending on, again, the layout of the infrastructure and things along those lines, it's easy to be quite flexible with the dark trace technology. Yep. Yeah, no, 100%. So dark trace can be easily deployed into many different SaaS applications and environments. Obviously, the big ones being like Salesforce, Microsoft 365, Google Workspace at the top there. Essentially, what we'll do is just deploy a SaaS connector to connect in and receive that information and syslogs from the SaaS environment wherever we're looking. And then in certain environments, such as say Microsoft 365, what we can actually do is we have Antigena's autonomous response available to take set actions to say, again, if we're seeing anomalous logins or unusual resource creation, things along those lines, to actually jump in and stop those actions or potential threats in real time as well. Yeah, if you want to get a little ahead of the curve, I'm sure there might be a way. I haven't seen anybody be that proactive yet, but I'm sure there's potential for that with the autonomous response there too. Yeah.
Now, moving along, one of the other great ideas for leveraging team approaches in development and cybersecurity is taking an approach that's called DevSecOps. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but it's the idea that security isn't bolted on, but it's built in, and it's the holy grail of cyber-safe security software development and integration. But it's easy to say, and it's hard to do. You have to build it into your culture and the day-to-day activities of your team. But it is worth it. And it's worth it because it's the ultimate teamwork between development, security, and operations. Now, VMware has done a study about DevSecOps, and the lessons about people are important. And so here to share those lessons with us from the study is David Balkar. He's the security strategist from VMware. David, the virtual podium is yours.
Hi everybody, I'm Dave Balkar here with VMware Carbon Black, and this is Bridging the Developer and Security Divide. So a little bit about me. I'm a security strategist here at VMware Carbon Black. I've got about 20 years in the IT security industry, mainly focused around penetration testing, IR, and forensics. I've also been a programmer in my former life as well, so I definitely have that experience. So as we talk today about a little bit about this divide between the two groups, right, or several groups, I also want to let's talk about some of the threats that are happening and what's causing some of this friction out there is, we have everything from DDoS attacks to hacktivists to insider threats to, nation state attacks, breaking into systems. And more, it's happening through the apps that are getting published, right? We need to have better security on that stuff, better visibility into what we're doing. And that's really what we're here to talk about. As you could see from this picture, it's probably took two people to hook up the security camera, one person to do the electricity and one person to actually hook the camera up, but they didn't talk. So obviously the electricity didn't get plugged in or the camera got plugged in. So it's all about that, get that collaboration to do that. Just like here, the fire department and the building person should have gotten together and says, you know what, that's probably not a good spot for that fire extinguisher. So we need to do something to move that. I mean, the building said, oh, this is what it was on the plans, but the fire department just said, you know what, that probably is not going to work. So the apps that are out there, we've seen this. We've seen these attacks going on out there or issues with security or privacy issues found in apps all over the place, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's a web app published, even internal apps that are, let's say, controlled, that are only for the company, can still be affected by security and privacy issues. So again, it's not just the teams that are involved here as well. It's also the organizations that are consuming this. So we've all heard about the supply chain issues like SolarWinds. They got into their dev teams and put exploit code in there. But it's funny, like this particular attack here, this is the Sandworm hackers went after the Centurion software for 4 years. So this software was free from the manufacturer, and they used it in their production environments, but they never issued a security notice. They never did updates. And the people that got this should have been aware, says, hey, I know this is free, but we need to look at it after 6 months, after a year. Is there an update to it? Or do we need to look at something else? Are we testing the security ourselves? Something definitely to think about it, because these attackers went after this obsolete software and just totally exposed all these companies that were using it. One of the big things is definitely teamwork. You got to have that teamwork between, the IT infrastructure, security, and dev teams across the board, because each one plays a vital part. And it's not just one team. It's got to be one team in general that's working together to make sure that whatever the dev team is producing, that, hey, it's secure and it's functional and it works, right? Because then it makes everyone look good, for sure. A lot of times you're dealing with, especially with teamwork, where yes, to get to the end product, it takes, multiple teams to get it done. Last year, VMware collaborated with Forrester to work on a report that talks about IT and security as working as a team sport, right? And some of the key findings here is the collaboration between IT and security teams is a priority. But only 55% of business leaders cited an increase in collaboration as their top goal. They said most of their already claim that both their IT and security are responsible for the development execution of the security, which is great. But what about the other 45%? We have to look at that. Collaboration efforts are met with challenges. We know that because you've got the ops team, you've got the security team, and you've got the dev team. They all have their own metrics, there are RFIs, everything they're trying to do is like, okay, I've got to get this app out versus I got to secure the entire environment to I got to run the entire environment. So the dev team only sees part of that. The security team kind of sees everything except the development most of the time. And same thing with the infrastructure team. We've got to bring these groups together more. And the biggest thing here is companies are starting to adopt this unified and consolidated IT and security strategy to address these challenges. Now, it says only 30% have actually already done it, with a 41% trying to do it over the next 12 months. But what about everybody else? I think it's definitely going to take that next 3 to 5 years to really bring everyone else on board. So as we talk about the collaboration between IT and security, it is a priority. And some of those challenges, let's say we develop an app as fast as possible and we get it published because the ops team is giving access to the develop team, says, oh, here's the server, just go ahead and publish it as fast as you can, but not involving the security team. What's going to happen? What happens if I'm publishing so fast and something either it was a bad compile, it was a form not truncated or whatever it needed to be, is looking at it, the security team is going to say, hey, I'm protecting it with a WAF or something. Put some security controls around it. But as an attacker, I can take advantage of anything that's messed up in the app and then just compromise the whole thing. So that's something that the security team needs to work hand in hand with the development from the get-go. So it's like, hey, as before we actually publish, can the security team run pen testing against it? But can we look at the logic as they're building these apps? And that's really getting in those meetings early on and says, hey, we have a field for social security number. It should only be this many characters. It cannot accept anything but numbers. Make sure that you can stop those buffer overflows and these other and like SQL injection attacks and stuff like that. It's very, very key to do that. And doing that collaboration between all the teams gives you that visibility, gives visibility across all three teams, right? And the whole DevSecOps opportunities as well. So not only can the developers get access to, hey, we have some new security teams or security products coming along to make our security better, but how's that going to affect my app as I develop it? Same thing with the ops team. They can say, oh, yes, we've got some new security on top of this. We have a new app coming in. How do we functionally make sure it's up and running and provide that, that 365, 24/7 availability? Definitely visibility is number one there. Definitely not this kind of visibility is not going to be what you want to look at. And that is a real picture. So in closing is doing all this stuff, you can build for the advantage, right? And when I say that is, one of the biggest issues that, and this is from a CIO of an energy company, he stated in that Forrester report, is that, basically 100% of what's going on is the communication. We've got to fix the communication between these three teams. Or even other teams as well. They've got to be talking to each other from the get-go across everything. That way, hey, 10% of the dev site life cycle needs to be, hey, security is eyes on glass saying, okay, yes, we see that, what's going on. Same thing with the infrastructure and ops teams going, okay, you need these ports open, but why? Can we change those ports because we don't allow those ports because of X, Y, and Z? All that can be handled with really, really good communication. And sharing that responsibility and having that unified strategy, because companies that have that consolidated unified strategy are seeing fewer breaches, quicker threat remediation, and increased collaboration amongst all their teams and partners, even, and vendors. So again, I'm Dave Balcar with VMware Carbon Black, and I want to thank you so much for listening today.
Welcome back. If you've ever been to one of these events, you'll know how the quiz works. We pose some questions and then you and the audience answer them. And we'll show you the results. You can compare them with your fellows in the audience in there. So participating in the quiz is easy. The question appears on the right-hand side of the screen, you know that, or below me below the window where I am right now if you're on a mobile device. And if you're in full screen mode, remember, you won't see it, so take yourself out of full screen mode and then you play along. It will be fun, I promise, in there. So if you haven't already entered your name and accepted the terms in the chat box, you got to do that now. So please do that now, and you can participate in the quiz. Okay. And a lot of you are on chat. I know I've been following you, so you're ready to go. Now we're going to see the results live, and so you can compare yourself with everybody else in the audience, see if you measure up. So let's get started. First question. Theme for today's quiz is ransomware in Canada. And all of the questions are based on insights from a new TELUS Canadian ransomware study. It's on the platform, and we'll be featuring it in a series on IT World Canada in the coming weeks in there. So here's the first question. What percentage of Canadian organizations experienced a ransomware incident in the last 12 months? See if you can figure out what's the right answer. Is it A, 17%? Is it B, 27%? Is it C, 67%? Or is it D, 97%? So 17, 27, 67, or 97? What do you think? The answer? C, 67%. Now, according to TELUS's study, the verticals that experience the most in ransomware incidents are healthcare, agricultural, and financial. Ready for another? Question 2. Now, according to the TELUS Canadian ransomware study, the top 2 attack vectors in Canada are A, email, phishing, and IT supply chain. That's A. B, with malvertisements. I love that term. It's a new term for malvertisements and physical delivery. I guess that's bad ads or corrupted ads. C, misconfigurations and email phishing. That's C. Or D, email phishing and zero-day vulnerabilities. A, B, C, or D. Pick one in there. Ready? And the answer is, of course, C. Yeah. Misconfigurations and email phishing. If you've been following anything on any of our broadcasts or any of these, you'll see that this is a big place for new attack vector, misconfigurations, and email and phishing. But there are other common attack vectors, including to the study: malicious websites, compromised credentials, and known vulnerabilities. Ready for another question? Question 3. You're doing well, right? I hope you're doing well. Question 3. Of those that experienced a ransomware incident in the last 12 months, what percentage paid the ransom? Now, this is a question I really wanted the answer to. I got an early copy of the study, but I'm really fascinated by this. Was it A, 14%? Was it B, 24%? Was it C, 34%? Or was it D, 44%? So of those that experienced a ransomware incident in the last 12 months, what percentage paid the ransom in there? And the answer is D, 44%. Now, shockingly, this is despite the payment, access to data, at least the study says the access to data was not fully restored for more than half of the ransomware victims. That's according to the TELUS study. Question 4. Of the organizations that chose not to pay the ransom, their top reason was A, concerns about negative publicity; B, their backups were reliable and suitable for recovery; C, cyber insurance didn't cover the payment; or D, they didn't believe the hackers would restore data access. 4 things: A, negative publicity; B, backups were reliable; C, cyber insurance wouldn't cover it; or D, they didn't believe the hackers would restore data access. And the answer is B. 49% of the respondents stated that the top reason for not engaging the adversaries was high confidence levels in their backups, and congratulations to them. Other concerns included bad publicity, lack of trust, and engaging with hackers. They are criminals after all, but 49% of the respondents say the top reason for not engaging was high confidence in their backups. Last question. How are you doing on this? You keeping up? Okay. Last question, question 5. What percentage of organizations delayed or canceled IT projects as a result of the ransomware incident? One of you were asking about what is really lost in these. Yeah. What percentage of organizations delayed or canceled IT projects as a result of a ransomware incident? Was it A, 15%, B, 25%, C, 35%, or D, 45%? 15, 25, 35, or 45? And the answer, depressingly, is D, 45%. The average ransom paid, based on the respondents to this study, was $140,000. But that only represents 16% of the total cost of recovery. The other costs: delayed or canceled IT projects, loss of employee productivity, delayed or canceled business investments. It goes on and on. Cost of ransomware is great in there. Now, that's just a sample of what you're going to see in this detailed survey. And I have with me the author of the survey, joining to talk about the surveys, Kevin Longerman. He's a senior strategy manager with TELUS Security, and I'm going to welcome into the studio. And I've got my reaching for my iPad so I can watch your questions coming in. Welcome, Kevin.
Yeah, hi Jim. Thanks for having me on today. And hello everyone who joined us today. I'm very excited to be here. I think Jim gave a great overview and introduction to our study. I want to maybe spend a minute or two just giving some more context around it. And at TELUS, we're a managed security service provider. We deal with Canadian organizations that are dealing with things like ransomware on a regular basis, and we're very aware of the impact it's having on the global stage. But it's also something that we're struggling with at home as well. So to get a better understanding of how this ransomware threat is impacting us, we teamed up and partnered with IDC Canada, and we conducted a survey of over 450 different Canadian organizations. And this was from coast to coast across multiple verticals, as well as organization sizes. And so, we explored a lot of different interesting areas, but, really what we're doing is we're taking the results from the survey and we're exploring them and commenting on them throughout the study. And so some particular areas of interest for me were around how the tactics for threat actors is changing. So for instance, we're seeing this rise of something that's called double extortion or multiple extortion is becoming the new norm. We saw that, and Jim commented on this quickly as well, around the different attack vectors that they're using and how they're changing over time. And then, in terms of the systems, when we think about ransomware, historically, we always think about things like the endpoints themselves, but that's changing which points of our network and systems that they're actually going after. And then, of course, there's that aftermath piece. And we talked a little bit about costs of recovery and the cost of the ransomware incident as well. But what we dive into in the study as well as around these long-term effects, right? How does it affect your organization over time? And I know what I've talked about so far is a little bit gloomy, but of course, it's not all bad news. We spend a significant amount of time talking about how organizations can improve their own cybersecurity posture. And one of our goals was to provide organizations the benchmarks that they need to compare themselves to their peers in the market, right? To see how they compare and what they're doing versus maybe others who are doing or have a more successful defense strategy with ransomware. And so I guess the takeaway here from my perspective after working on this study is that, we're all in this together, and defending against ransomware requires an ongoing effort from us all. And of course, if you want the full story, if you want to explore the study yourself, you can download it from the MapleSEC platform, or you can go to telus.com/ransomware study. It's an interesting development. So if you think about ransomware, it's always been about someone, encrypting your own data and then selling you back the decryption keys. And that's a good move for a threat actor because the data that they don't have to go and sell the data themselves. That data is most valuable to you, so they're encrypting it so you can't get access to it. Now, what they're doing now is they're also exfiltrating that data. So they're going to encrypt it, sell you back the encryption codes, but now they also have another lever to extort you with because now they have a copy. So they can release that on the dark web unless you pay an additional fee. They can, sell that IP to a competitor, what have you. So it gives them multiple levers that they can use to extort you. And so it's, it's just another iteration in how they're learning how they can get a higher ransom payment from you. Yeah. So I mean, when you think about the data itself, it can be encrypted. That data can be corrupted. It might be lost, and then they're going to sell you back decryption keys that may or may not work. They may or may not work for all systems. So when you're dealing with a malicious actor, you don't really have any sort of service agreement. So whatever you maybe pay for, you're going to get what you get, and there's no real, customer service after that. So I think that's the main issue is, once that ransom is paid, they send you some decryption keys or what have you, and then, you're left with what's there. Of course, there could be damage to your systems. There could be corruption, additional issues that, you can't go back and discuss with the threat actor afterwards. Yeah, for sure. And I think, the media does excellent coverage on public sector and large enterprise and these mega breaches or these large ransomware incidents. What you don't hear about as much is these smaller organizations, right? So just working at TELUS and us, and TELUS being an MSSP, we see these smaller organizations struggling with this every day, and we work to help them. But even from the study itself, I mean, if you look at the 67% of organizations that were infected with ransomware, there's some variation, but it's still very high with small organizations as well. In terms of being equipped to deal with it, they usually do have smaller IT cybersecurity budgets. They may not even have a cybersecurity staff member there. There's usually an IT, maybe one IT team member who's wearing multiple hats, and he's the network guy, and he may be in charge of cybersecurity as well. So they do have some additional challenges that maybe the enterprise side doesn't have to deal with. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think that the 67% number was fairly surprising to me. It was actually a lot higher than I thought it was. There's other studies out there on the global scale or what have you that number varies, but almost 70% of organizations having ransomware, and that's not just ever. That's within the last 12 months, right? So that's a pretty impressive number. Outside of just the sheer, I guess, number of organizations dealing with this issue, I would say, I guess on the cost front, we always see these big numbers like 140,000, and that can be the total cost can range, but it's the fact that the actual the ransomware payment is only 16% of that total cost of getting back to business as usual, right? So that's a pretty small number. It's the downtime, it's all the issues around that really brings up that cost, and then we still haven't really, I guess, accounted for the long-term costs, things like, you've damaged your reputation. One of the big things that I found interesting is, and I forget the exact stat, but a lot of organizations, what they do to pay for this ransomware recovery is that they're taking money from their budget from other programs, right? You don't budget for a ransomware incident, so that money has to come from somewhere. So now you're basically stealing from your future to pay for this incident, and then you become less competitive, and some of those business investments you wanted to do, you can't actually do that. So it's sort of those long-term ramifications as well that I was kind of concerned about.
So thank you. That's just a sample of what was in the survey. Kevin Lonergan, I keep saying his name wrong, Senior Strategy Manager with TELUS Security, was there. Now, Kevin works with a lot of stakeholders to understand market trends, customer needs, emerging technologies, and to ensure TELUS is offering a strong portfolio of services to customers now and in the future. Great work on this study in there. And of course, I mentioned that Kevin was IDC Canada's cybersecurity research practice lead for 8 years. He's published dozens of studies and presented them across the country. So check this study out. It's on our site. It's on the TELUS site. We'll make it available to you. It's well worth the read in there. Okay. So back to more about developing our cybersecurity team and this idea that it's a big team. And if you're like most organizations, that team is growing. There's new people joining. Of course, there's new challenges. It's high stress at times. It's challenging. And we wanted to do a deeper dive and talk about to somebody who lives in this in the day-to-day. And a little while ago, I had a discussion with Ram Vaithyadam of Manage Engine. And Ram is part of Manage Engine, which is part of Zoho, the software company. And they provide all of the infrastructure support, and of course, with that, cybersecurity. They actually run the cybersecurity for the organization, and they have a development team using DevSecOps for developing software and tool sets for their clients. Now, when I asked how many people were on the team, Ram said about 900. And I said, okay, how many of them are dedicated to security? And he said, no, that's our security team. A lot of other people in there, but that's our security team. We have about 15,000 employees around the world. The security team alone is 900. And that's when I said, you have to come in and have a chat with me. about the issues involved in building a team and running a team of that size in a growing company, handling operations and development, and Ram agreed to do just that. So Ram, tell me about Managed Engine, the company, what you do, size of the company, all that. Tell me more about it.
Managed Engine is the IT management division of Zoho Corporation. And Zoho itself was established in the year 1996. So it's been over 25 years for Zoho Corp. And Managed Engine was started in the year 2002. So we've been around for the last 20 years. And in Managed Engine, we want to serve our customers when it comes to IT management, the entire spectrum of IT management. And there are 4 main practices that we help our customers with, which is IT service management, IT security and identity and access management, endpoint and device management, and IT operations. So in a way, what we want to do is with Managed Engine, bring the SOC and the NOC working together, and increase collaboration. That's what we want to do, and we want to make it very, very simple and easy for people to use our solutions.
You might want to trademark that phrase, bring the SOC and the NOC together. That's good. I like that. That's good. So what's your role there?
So I'm a cybersecurity specialist at Managed Engine, and as part of my role, I get to learn about the different attack methods that the bad guys are using nowadays. I have to keep myself updated about that, and I also have to keep myself updated about the ways in which companies can defend themselves. It's my job to basically work with our customers and tell them about these things, these new things that are happening, and keep them updated. And of course, in case they have any problems implementing certain cybersecurity solutions, I try to help them out over there as well.
Now, when we were talking about this earlier, you have quite a large team. Like, how do you? That's going to be a challenge to manage a team that big.
Well, I told you, Managed Engine, we've got 4 different practices, and I work within the IT security and identity and access management space. And even this particular space that we work in, it's 900 people. Of course, I'm including all kinds of people here, not just development, but we also have folks from marketing. We have folks from pre-sales, support. So we have over 900 people. And definitely, it is a big challenge. But over time, what we've realized is we've got to look at the strengths of people. So our recruitment process is very, very involved. We have about 4 or 5 rounds of recruitment, and we want to make sure that we hire right. Once we bring them in, we are there to support them to the hilt. So we have all of these training processes in place where people can get comfortable. And one thing that's really struck me as very, very important is to get the people to start contributing as early as possible. Maybe within the first 10 days of them joining, maybe assign a small project to them, a mini project, so to speak, and get them contributing as early as possible. That really gives them a spark, gives them the motivation to go off from there and achieve even better things. But it's really, really important to get them contributing as early as possible.
Which is a great idea, but this is a complex piece. How do you keep them from making early mistakes? How do you keep guardrails around people? Or how do you get them to contribute, but still not risk your security at that point?
Our processes play a huge role. We've got certain checks and balances in place, keeping in mind the new people, of course, and of course, even the people who have been there for a while, even they can make mistakes. Mistakes can happen from anybody. So we've got these processes in place, checks and balances in place, so that there are several levels of quality checks. As reporting managers in the company, we've basically got to make sure that we take the extra load, especially when the person is new, and we've got to support them.
You have a really comprehensive education program for all staff. You want to tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we do have an education program. So I can talk about 2 different programs here. One program is about the jobs that they do, the roles that they have taken up with the company. For example, I work in cybersecurity, so every new person who comes in will have to finish certain modules, and this can take as many as 4 months. And then by the time they are through those 4 months, they get fairly confident about the kind of technologies that they work with. You're still learning. The learning never stops. You're always learning, but then after 4 months, you get fairly confident about what you have to talk to customers about the different technologies we work with. And apart from that, we also have cybersecurity related programs.
So you have a continuous commitment to education for everybody on the staff.
Definitely. Everybody, yeah, there is continuous education all the time. So every 6 months, again, I'll take the cybersecurity example. Every 6 months, there is a training that people have to go through.
Wow. And everybody goes? No exceptions?
Well, everybody's supposed to go through that. If they don't, then they'll get a call. They'll get a call from HR.
So DevSecOps is obviously on everybody's mind. You have a team that's there. How do you keep the team working and still use the best and latest of the development techniques that are out there?
We work in cross-functional teams. And one of the things that we are focusing on right now is to bring in the ML and AI into our cybersecurity solutions. And in Zoho, we have a team called Zoho Labs who work on AI technologies. And they develop it kind of like a framework into which we can connect into. So all the other products that we are working on can use that as a framework.
Obviously, as software developers, you're concerned with that old aphorism of you build security in, you don't bolt it on. How do you use your teams to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've got to build security in rather than bolt it on. Security is never an afterthought. Attackers have got very, very sophisticated nowadays. Every project that we have taken up, we've got specific people looking at security and building that security within the product. So as people are developing, it goes through checks, multiple levels of checks at every milestone, so that we make sure that for that particular module, security is actually added on, and we don't get surprised at the later stage of it.
So getting people up to speed is a real challenge. And you've talked a little bit about getting them, productive as quickly as possible, which I love as an idea. But are there other ways that you use to get your team up to speed and get them working together and on the same page, as a team?
For the new folks, the reporting manager has got to pull in their weight and empower these new folks. So they've got to actually mentor these folks and make sure that all the challenges that may creep up are all eliminated as much as possible. These new people are still finding their way across different things. They're not really sure who works on what. So all of those kind of bottlenecks need to be eliminated. So they've got to introduce these new folks to the right people, people that these folks may be collaborating later on with. And the mentor should be available at any time that these people, face problems. And they have to be available along with a smile on their face, right? So that's how these people will feel okay to actually interrupt them multiple times in a day. I think that's very, very important. The second thing is I really feel, and we do this as a company, that new folks should be part of support calls. That's one way that you can really, really understand the customer's problem. A lot of things come up in these support calls. It's not just the new support folks who have got to be part of these support calls, but we also make it a point that people across different teams are part of these support calls. They're just silently listening, but they get to hear from the customer's mouth what their challenges are. And that reflects in the work they do.
Yeah, that's such a fabulous idea. For so many times we do things in companies, we don't see the impact on the customer. I think that's just a great idea of a good way to build teams. Let's talk about security, the challenges that you face. There's always new challenges coming up. How do you keep up with that? What are some of the new challenges you're seeing that you're trying to communicate to your team?
Right. Ransomware has become a huge challenge. In the last 2 years, 130 new strains of ransomware have been released. It all started in 2020, right after the pandemic, right? We all saw the snake ransomware. And ransomware is also morphing into something called disruptionware, where attackers are actually going after the operational technology of the company apart from the IT.
What are your goals for the future in terms of developing your team? Where do you want to go with your team?
We want to make sure that we create an environment where every person feels empowered. Every person, is productive, is as productive as they can be. And down the line, it's not just a place where, they do a job, but it's a place where they can build a career. We always at it for the long term. So that's where we want to actually take our teams, each and every single person.
Good stuff. I wish you all the best. Sounds like a great team to work with.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks a lot.
That was fabulous. Thank you, Ram. If you want to find out more about Manage Engine, Ram's company, in there, check out the video on the platform. It is literally under my feet in there. Just a terrific. And speaking of thanking people, the chat for this has been just fabulous. You guys are great. I can only watch so much of it because I'm watching programs same as you. But when you get to multitasking, you see some great conversation there. Join in, and if you want to share it with the global world, hashtag MapleSEC. Get out there, and I'll pick up as soon as we're finished, and I hope you'll stay on after that. So, rapid show today. We've covered planning, identifying, recruiting, training, and even managing the team. But how do you ensure your team stays sharp? How do you test what they know without a real attack? And how do you know they'll execute according to plan and make the right decisions? Now, for that matter, how do you know your plan is right? I guess Dave Massen used that great quote, "No plan survives the battlefield." I preferred his version from Mike Tyson, which said that everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. So how do you test your plan in a real world experience? Now, for years, companies have done tabletop exercises, walkthroughs of their plan, and these are great. Many of these have a pretty narrow focus, though. They focus on the technical aspects of cyber attacks, the so-called red and blue team. One attacks, the other defends. As I said, they're good, but lately a number of companies have been adding to these exercises, using what we might term gamification to make them more engaging and to widen the scope to really get our imagination going. These types of training go beyond a scripted process with right and wrong answers not always as clear, and they have the uncertainty of real life. They also help engage that wider team and make you think of things. And this is important because we get so tunnel vision so easily. They make you think of things that your plan might be missing. Now, you might have heard of gamification and the use of games before, but what does it really mean? How does it really work? What does it look like? These are the questions a lot of people have. So we've been lucky. We brought in some folks from a company called Fractional CISO who really do know the aspects of gaming and have applied these to the areas of cybersecurity. They're going to cover how and why gamification works, and they're going to give you a sample of it in action. Now, there are lots of different approaches to gamification, but they're going to use one that's freely available. It's under a Creative Commons license, and added bonus, it's going to be demonstrated by the woman who designed it. Now, my guests are Carlota Sage, Chinmay Panikkar, and Alan McDermott. So, Carlota.
Thank you, Jim. Much appreciated. Hello, MapleSEC. Very happy to be here. I am here to talk to you about incident response, gamification, and honey badgers, of all things. And I use this to talk about running role-playing game style incident response tabletops. So Jim has already introduced me. I am a vCISO principal with Fractional CISO, as is Alan. Chinmay is our security operations manager. I'm not going to go too much about us, so let's just jump straight into the action here. Why do you want to do tabletop exercises? You want to do these for lots of different reasons. The leadership sees them as a compliance requirement or a training exercise. They're not just a good idea, right? They are best practice, and in places with following compliance frameworks, they are required, right? For the leadership, this gives that chance, as Jim mentioned, to review your policy and plan around incident responses. It can also be a great team building exercise, builds really good empathy between teams, breaks down some silos. For the team that needs to attend this, it's probably a work requirement, right? But they get a break from work for a little bit, and they get some preparation for a real instant. The best time to practice a real instant is not during the real instant, right? And if they've got some kind of security certifications, they may also get some education credit out of that. You can test your incident response plan and your BCDR, your business continuity disaster recovery plan, in the same tabletop exercise. I like to mix it up and just hit all those birds with one stone. What is role playing in this context, right? Let's talk about that for a second. Gamification, that's that big word. Everyone's using it. It's been around for a few years now. You can get degrees in it. Really what gamification is designing systems or interactions with game elements to make human motivations for specific outcomes, right? It's more than just playing a game. You can do a lot with gamification without making something an actual game. I also throw honey badgers in here because honey badgers are nature's little creatures that really just don't care about anything. And sometimes it's really hard for your team to get involved and engaged in these pieces. So the honey badger is kind of my representation of teams that they're so busy, they don't have time to care about this, but they have to, either because, like I said, it's a good idea, it's a best practice, or in some cases, it's a requirement. When we're talking about gamification and specifically about role playing, we're just adding those little pieces of play that make interactions much more natural. We watch puppies and kittens play with each other, and they use that play to learn to hunt when they grow up. It's the same for children. Children learn social skills through play. All we're trying to do is bring that element of play back into this piece of learning about security, of building those bridges, those communication bridges between individuals and teams, so that when you do encounter a real situation, you can react much better to it. If you want to go full on gaming, there are lots of options. You have no shortage of actual games if you want to do that. Those tabletop exercises, they may be board games, they may actually be role-playing games in a Dungeons and Dragons kind of style game. If you're a gamer, you know what that means. But here's the reality. Most people are not gamers. So when we're talking about our security teams and we're looking at them through that lens of, are they deeply technical? Are they maybe not as technical? Are they gamers or non-gamers? Those board games and those tabletop, those role-playing games are really targeting that gamer side of things. But there is a significant portion of your population, of your workforce, of your team that are not gamers. And that's 3/4 of who you're looking at in this box, right? Or actually half, I suppose. From that perspective, those board games or role-playing games that are really, really gamey are going to fall flat with those teams or those individuals. You're not going to engage them as well. It's going to be a lot harder to engage them and to get those outcomes that you're looking for if you're not considering that. I also want to make sure that people have the skills and the tools that they need to run their own incidents. I've done dozens of incident response tabletops. I worked very briefly with a company called Hackback Gaming. I really enjoyed it. But the reality was that was self-selecting. If you hired Hackback Gaming to give you an incident response tabletop, then you were a gamer yourself, and that's how you knew about them, or you felt like your team was filled with gamers, and that's what you were targeting. As a part of Fractional CISO, I have many more types of clients, and I have clients that have 0 gamers in their incident response tabletops. And if you try to make it too much like a board game or too much like Dungeons and Dragons, you're not going to be as successful with that incident response tabletop. So let's talk a little bit about how to set up that tabletop if you're not going for a full game. You can still bring in those game elements. One of those elements is a very specific time limit. You don't think of that as being a game element, but being able to say, I need to reach a goal in this time frame, that is a gaming element. You have players, right? This is an exercise in imagination. So you want to keep it large enough that you get good diversity of thought and lots of good interactions going on, but you want to keep it small enough so that you don't get out of hand, you don't go too far over the time limit, that you can still reach those goals and get those outcomes that you're looking for. I usually say 6 to 12 players. 8 to 10 is ideal. Anything more than 12, I start to split into two groups. You can also have a mix within your players. You may have the leadership team across an organization. You may have just the technical or security team in one specific organization, or you may have a mix of leadership and technical, or technical and non-technical. And you have to think about, as you're building these tabletops, who's coming, and you want to respond a little bit to each of that, to each change. Everyone should have a chance to exercise as a part of this tabletop. I like to do just 2 simple rounds. And in my world, a turn, every player gets a turn in a round. I don't necessarily keep time. I don't look for anything specific. All I want in a turn, I want every player to do one thing, and I want them to communicate to somebody else on that team. That's all I'm looking for. When I throw out a scenario, and I'll show you about scenarios in a moment, when I throw out a scenario and I tag a specific person, I want that person to do something. And then when they're done doing something, I want them to pass that on. And the way to pass on the fact that there's something going on is to communicate. I'm going to show you a few scenarios. We're going to actually pause and demonstrate one for you. When we're talking about scenarios for incident response around security, common ones are ransomware, or you get an alert from a monitoring service, or there's some exfiltration of your data found on the dark web. Business continuity, disaster recovery, those can be more around maybe insider threat, or a physical data center disaster, a regional disaster that's affecting your cloud service, or a significant portion of your employees. You can pull these kinds of scenarios straight out of Twitter. There are Twitter feeds that are nothing but incident response and disaster recovery kinds of scenarios. You can mix these up, like I said, in your tabletop so that you're hitting those 2 requirements with one practice. So here are some example scenarios for you. All right. I'm going to pick on you, Ellen.
All right.
You're a user. You're in a smallish company, let's say 80 people. It starts acting kind of funny. It's running really slow. Your mouse is jumping around. What do you do, Mr. Accounting Person?
The first thing I'm going to do, because I've called help desk before, is turn it off and on again.
All right. So here's where this gamification piece can come in for you as the person leading the game. I'm going to pause us there. Alan has just given his action. I'm going to turn the computer off and back on again. Now, because I am leading the game, if I wanted to introduce gaming elements, but not push that onto Alan, I can have my own set of die, and I can roll some dice and say, okay, if I have a 0 to 5, something really bad happens. If I have a 5 to 10, the computer restarts, nothing changes. If I have a 10 to 15, then maybe the reboot solved it. That's how you can add some gaming elements in without pushing the game onto the user. So in the background, I roll a few die and maybe I get a 6. So nothing's happened. All right, Mr. Accounting Person, Alan, you reboot your computer and it's still showing the same thing. Now what do you do?
I'm going to call help desk to see what help I can get.
Okay, great. He's just performed an action and very naturally reached out to somebody else. So now, Chinmai, I'm going to pick on you. Ring, 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 ring.
Oh.
Hello, help desk. Alan?
I'm here.
What would you say to help desk? This is a part of that role playing. You can actually make the players talk to each other as if they are in those particular roles. So Alan, you are an accountant who has just called the help desk. What do you say to help desk?
Hi, help desk. My computer's running really slow. I tried turning it off and on again. Nothing's happening. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, help desk.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Let me run a quick scan and just make sure that there are no viruses or weird files on your computer. And I run the scan.
Okay, so now again, I'm going to roll my dice, and maybe this time I get an 11. Oh, wow, Chinmai, you actually find a bad file on that computer. What do you do?
All right, so I'm gonna instruct Alan to delete that file.
Okay.
And rerun the scan.
All right. Ellen, do you perform that action?
I do.
All right. I'm going to roll the die again to see. I'm rolling the die. Chinmai, you have successfully deleted and restarted the computer, or Alan has, and you re-performed the scan. And in fact, everything's coming up clear again. What do you ask Alan now?
Awesome. All right. So Alan, I have rerun the scan. Everything looks good. Just to make sure, did you maybe do some investigation and happen to click on something weird that you shouldn't have, or transferred any information from here to there?
Well, there was that one Nigerian prince. It sounded like a really good deal. I had to click on that.
All right. So now Help Desk has the information that Alan has actually clicked on something. What do you do with that, Chinmai?
All right. I am going to involve my information security team, because I feel like they would be better at instructing what the next steps are.
All right.
I make a call to my friend on the information security team.
Okay, so I'm going to pause us there. I'm going to tell you what I'm actually looking for as part of this. One of the things I was looking for was to actually isolate the computer from the network. She did run those diagnostics, but Alan, when he rebooted the computer, still connected back to the network and never really took the computer off the network. So there was that chance for spread. Chinmai did run the diagnostics. She did not perform a full network scan once she heard that the Nigerian prince, had sent links around, but maybe InfoSec would have done that if we'd carried this scenario on further. Nobody, including InfoSec, because we never got there, pulled out the IR plan. I think that's okay for this one. We did have good communication going back. We did not get far enough in our scenario. If we'd gone a little bit further and found that this was a much bigger deal, I would want the information security people to actually say, okay, I need folks in a Slack channel, or I need a Zoom call, and we need to start communicating to the staff that there's an issue. At some point, you decide where the scenario is going to go. We can keep doing scenarios, and you can do as many scenarios as you feel like you need to do to engage as much of the team as possible. If your marketing person is there, turn to them and say, hey, a friend of yours has called and said, has your Twitter account been hacked? You can run that scenario, because that's a very realistic thing to happen. Somebody has taken over a social media account. This is one of a very popular way for attackers to get hold of credentials. Or to just screw with companies or organizations. They'll take over that social media account and start posting really terrible things. So in that case, I want that marketing person to check their other social media accounts. I want to make sure that Help Desk or information security resets all of those marketing passwords and makes them turn on MFA. There are a lot of things that you can do that can either be very non-technical or very technical. You can also have an industry or peer event happen where, the CEO is read about, for example, the Okta breach recently. That CEO may call your IT desk or your information security manager or your CIO and say, hey, what's this thing with Okta? Are we affected? That's a perfectly reasonable place to start a scenario. So I'm going to keep moving. If you want to add that gaming element, you don't have to. Your players can keep that role playing going and just have a more playful conversation, and let them go with it wherever it goes. You in the background can actually do that gamification for yourself and say, hey, my company is started with 100% help. I'm going to roll 5 to 7 dice at the end of every round. Again, we're just having 2 rounds. And a round just means everyone has gone at least once. It doesn't have to be really formal. You can call a round when you're ready. for everything that a person did right in these scenarios, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if they did it right, or in this case, I have 2 3s, but if they did it correctly, I take away a die from what I'm rolling. That means they have more points at the end. And the reason that's important is if we're adding in those gaming elements, you can actually score them on what they've done as a team. If they score more than 80%, these sets of scenarios have been effectively handled. If they don't, as you go down, you can get really silly with this and go, oh, this incident, it's trending on Twitter, but we're going to recover, but maybe the IT or security team takes a hit, roll to see who loses their job, and make it very hammy. It doesn't have to be serious. If they do really badly, the company closes, right? But that's, again, very lightweight gaming elements that track back to, hey, you did well, so you did very well in the end, or you didn't do as well with those scenarios as that I'd hoped, and here's what happens to the company or to you as a result. So the main thing I want you to remember is, as you're playing these games or creating these games yourself, whether you go and buy a backdoor and breaches kind of thing, or you take this slide deck and make your own set of scenarios and do very lightweight role playing, you need to know who your players are. So if they're very technical, your scenarios should be more technical and maybe test them a little bit more, test their knowledge about the systems. If they are less technical, you're going to look more for that collaboration and that communication. And then as you're creating this game, document your scenarios so you know what you want from those players during the game. If you have it in your head, it's easy to get distracted. I really recommend writing those things down. Know where you're going. You know what you want from this team. You either want to test your IR plan or your BCDR, or both, or all three if you have separate policies and plans. So if you know what your outcomes are, you can potentially even kind of help guide your players in the right direction. But you do want to leave a few things to chance. You don't want to overstructure this. People, once they kind of get the hang of it and remember how to play, they'll get creative and they'll take you in places that you weren't expecting. Maybe they'll solve a problem in a way that you hadn't thought of. You should give them credit for that. Make sure that you're giving them some room to explore this space. But really, the biggest and most important part is to have fun with it. This is above and beyond anything else. It's a team building and empathy building effort. It's great if you can tell, if you've got a creative enough team that you can say to your team, okay, I know you're deeply technical, but you can't access that info in your head right now. I want you to pretend to be a user that doesn't know these things. And then they have to really think, if I didn't know what I know, how would I solve this? It can be very entertaining. So these are the elements that make it a game or gamify your incident response tabletop. At this point, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I'll be happy to share this with Jim and the team, and you can always ask me questions after. Jim, back to you.
Thank you so much, Carlota and team. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
This was fabulous. I really brought home the whole idea of what gaming is, and I thank you very much. And for those who don't know, Carlota is a member of a CISO group that I'm part of, and I had this crazy idea and put a note out there, and she came to my rescue and came up with this fabulous piece in there. And that's that's something. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for coming
Absolutely.
in and showing us what you know in there. And it's a real points out the importance of networking and being able to network and share things, because otherwise I wouldn't have known about this. Now, this is a Creative Commons license you've got for this game. People could go get it, couldn't they?
Right. I'll upload this slide deck to my GitHub account. Anything that I develop that I release, I try to put under Creative Commons now so that anyone can take it and run with it.
Cool. And maybe you and I can do a little article in itworldcanada.com and just give an introduction to it and leave it out there for people to use.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And likewise, if you have these resources, let me know. Join my network. Let me know if you've got them in there. We'd love to hear about them. Love to hear things that people have done that are creative in this space. Thanks again.
Thank you.
back to the control room. We're gonna wrap up here. So Carlota and team, thank you so much. And if you have questions or comments, please type them into the chat. And I know that Carlota will be following this. We'll get back to you afterwards with some answers if we haven't seen them in there. And that is our show. Thank you for coming. Thank you to our platinum sponsor, Darktrace. Thank you to Manage Engine, VMware, our gold sponsors. Thank you to our supporting sponsors, Okta and TELUS. Thanks to the CIO Association, the CIO Strategy Council, and to my CISO group for pitching in there. To the McKinsey Institute for being totally stalwart supporters in there. And that's our show. But that's not the end of this. And MapleSEC goes on. Stories covering today's sessions will be available in articles on IT World Canada, itworldcanada.com, under Canadian CIO, and on all of the ITWC networks of publications. All of the videos will be available on demand in there, and you'll be able to catch up on these. I need a favor from you, though. I need you to please complete the event evaluation. There will be a link in tomorrow's thank you note. It really, really does help us to create better events. And remember, you can come back to the platform through maplesec.ca at any time to watch the videos on demand or download any of this great content. And if you send a friend or a colleague, they'll have to register, but it will continue to be complimentary thanks to the generosity of our sponsors. So if you get a call from one of our sponsors over the next little while, or you download something and somebody calls you up on there, do me a favor and just say thank you. You don't have to buy what they're selling, that's okay, but just say thank you for putting this together, because we could not do this without the generosity of those sponsors. We have a ton of great events coming up and a wide range of topics, and you can check these out at itworldcanada.com. Look for events on the menu. We have some great themed events in DevSecOps, low code, no code, women in cybersecurity, women in the IT channel, smart cities with Technicity West, and the great event, MapleSEC National, in the fall. Our next ITWC event, next one in schedule, is the Channel Innovation Conference. And that's going to salute the top 100 solution providers. And that's on April 26th. That'll be followed in May by our Digital Transformation Conference and Awards, our first big hybrid event. And that will be happening May 25th and 26th. And I'll be your host again. Our top women in cybersecurity nominations. Remember this, and you've seen a couple of great top women in cybersecurity. I know Cat Code has been nominated in this, and others have as well. It opened on March 8th, and please nominate somebody in there. The conference will recognize the honor roll winners in July 28th, so mark your calendars. And if you don't know a great woman in cybersecurity in Canada, get to know one and nominate her. Special thanks to my team at ITWC who put all this together behind the curtains. This is a major technical endeavor, and they make it look simple. Thanks to the team, thanks to you for coming, and until next time, I'm Jim Love saying stay safe, stay cyber safe.